The golden light of dawn crept over the horizon as Gabriela Ramirez clutched her worn shawl tightly around her shoulders, tears streaming silently down her face. The auction block beneath her feet felt like a gallows, and in many ways it was. Her fate, her freedom, her very life was to be sold to the highest bidder in this dusty corner of Texas known as Llano. The year was 1875, and though slavery had been abolished a decade prior, there were still dark corners of the West where the law turned a blind eye to the selling of Mexican and indigenous people under the guise of indentured servitude. Jake Yates watched from the edge of the crowd, his weathered Stetson pulled low over his blue eyes. At 30, he had seen his share of injustice on the frontier, but something about this particular auction twisted his gut into knots. Perhaps it was the dignified way the young woman held herself despite her circumstances, or the fierce intelligence in her eyes that contradicted her current powerlessness. "Next up, gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, his voice cutting through the morning air. A fine Mexican girl, 21 years old, strong back, good with cooking and cleaning, captured near the border, starting bid at $50. Jake's jaw clenched. He knew what fate awaited women sold at these auctions, the mines if they were lucky, brothels if they weren't. His hand drifted to the inside pocket of his worn leather vest, fingering the deed to his small ranch and the life savings he'd accumulated over years of hard work. $50, called a miner with yellowed teeth and grime-covered clothes. 75, countered a well-dressed man Jake recognized as the owner of the local saloon and brothel. The bidding continued, the price climbing as Gabriela stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains as if seeking escape in her mind if not in body. Jake found himself moving forward without conscious thought. $300, he called out, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. The crowd turned to look at him, surprise evident on their faces. The saloon owner narrowed his eyes. $350, the man countered. Jake took a deep breath. $500, my deed to 40 acres of good grazing land, my cabin, my horse, and my cattle. His voice never wavered as he added, everything I own. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Everything you own, Mr. Yates. For a Mexican girl, Jake met the man's gaze squarely. Everything. The saloon owner cursed and spat in the dust. No one in Llano could match that bid, and everyone knew it. The auctioneer waited a moment longer before bringing his gavel down with a crack that echoed in the morning air. Sold. To Mr. Jake Yates. Gabriela's eyes finally moved from the mountains to focus on the tall cowboy approaching the auction block. She didn't know if she should feel relief or dread. One master or another, what difference did it make? Still, there was something in this man's eyes that seemed different, a warmth, perhaps, or a decency that had been absent in the other bidders. As Jake helped her down from the platform, his touch was gentle, respectful. He kept his distance as they walked toward the edge of town, leaving behind the muttering crowd. When they were out of earshot, he stopped and turned to her. "My name is Jake Yates," he said quietly, "and you are free." Gabriela stared at him, uncomprehending. "Free?" Jake nodded. "Yes, madam, I didn't buy you to own you. That paper they gave me," he pulled out the bill of sale and tore it in half, "means nothing to me. You're a human being, not property." Gabriela's eyes widened, fresh tears forming. "Why would you do this? You gave everything." Jake looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with the raw gratitude in her eyes. "Some things are worth more than land or cattle, Miss Ramirez," she supplied. "Gabriela Ramirez, Miss Ramirez. I couldn't stand by and watch what was happening." He shifted his weight, looking genuinely uncertain for the first time. "I know you have no reason to trust any man right now, but I need to get my things from my ranch before the new owner takes possession. You're welcome to come along. Rest there for a spell before you decide where to go next. Or I can give you some money for the stagecoach if you'd prefer." Gabriela studied him, weighing his sincerity against her experiences. Logic told her to take the money and flee, but something deeper instinct perhaps whispered that this man was different. "I will go with you to your ranch," she decided finally. "And perhaps you can tell me how a cowboy came to spend everything he owned to free a stranger." Jake's relief was palpable. He offered a slight smile and gestured toward the livery stable. "My horse is this way. It's about a half-day's ride." As they walked, Gabriela felt the weight of the auction block falling away with each step. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since her capture 3 weeks ago, she felt a fragile hope taking root. Jake's horse, a sturdy palomino named Sundance, regarded them with intelligent eyes as they approached. Jake helped Gabriela mount before swinging up behind her, careful to maintain as much distance as possible given the circumstances. "I'm sorry about the close quarters," he said as they rode out of town. "It won't be for long." Gabriela sat stiffly at first, uncomfortable with the proximity to a man she barely knew. But as the miles passed and Jake kept his hands respectfully on the reins, she gradually relaxed. "How did you come to be at that auction?" Jake asked finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. Gabriela tensed again, the memories still raw. "I was traveling north with my cousin Maria. We were going to join our uncle in Santa Fe. Bandits attacked our wagon train. They killed the men and took the women." Her voice grew quieter. "Maria fought back harder than the rest of us. They shot her." Jake's breath caught. "I'm sorry. They sold most of us to different buyers along the way. I was the last." She turned slightly to look at him. "What about you? You gave up your home for a stranger. Most men would not do this." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was Comanche," he said finally. "My father was a white settler. They loved each other, married properly, but that didn't stop people from treating her like she was less than human." His jaw tightened at the memory. "When I was 12, some men came to our farm while my father was away. They said a woman like her had no right to own land with a white man. They dragged her out." He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Gabriela understood. "My father found me hiding in the barn. He taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he's willing to stand up for." Jake's voice had grown rough with emotion. "I've tried to live by that." Gabriela reached back hesitantly and placed her hand over his on the reins. "Your parents would be proud of the man you became." They rode in companionable silence after that, the Texas landscape rolling by. The sun climbed high, beating down mercilessly, but Gabriela found herself noticing the beauty around them: wildflowers dotting the plains, hawks circling lazily overhead, the distant blue outline of hills. By mid-afternoon, Jake's ranch came into view. It wasn't large by Texas standards, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral, situated near a creek with cottonwood trees providing welcome shade. A few dozen cattle grazed on the surrounding grassland. "It's not much," Jake said almost apologetically as they approached, "but it's been home." "It's beautiful," Gabriela replied honestly. After weeks of captivity, the simple homestead looked like paradise. As they dismounted, Jake pointed to the cabin. "You can rest inside if you'd like. I need to start making arrangements for the cattle." Gabriela nodded and headed toward the cabin, but paused at the door. "Mr. Yates," he turned, "thank you, not just for what you did, but for how you did it." A flush crept up Jake's neck, and he nodded before turning to tend to his horse. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a table and chairs nearby. A curtained-off area presumably contained a bed. Gabriela moved around the small space, running her fingers over the handmade furniture, noting the small touches that made it a bookshelf with well-read volumes, a quilt draped over a rocking chair, a pair of antlers mounted above the door. Her eyes burned with sudden tears. This man had given up this home, everything, for her freedom. It was incomprehensible. She sank into the rocking chair, overcome by the events of the day. That was where Jake found her an hour later, dozing from exhaustion. He cleared his throat softly to announce his presence, and she startled awake. "Sorry to wake you," he said. "I've rounded up what supplies we can take with us. The new owner will be arriving within the week, according to the auctioneer." "Where will you go?" Gabriela asked. Jake shrugged. "I have a friend who ranches near Fort Worth. Might head that way, see if he needs help." He hesitated. "Before we leave, I should tell you that I've put aside some money for you. It's not much, but it should get you to Santa Fe if that's still where you want to go." Gabriela studied him. "And what about your dreams, Mr. Yates?" "You sacrificed them today, Jake," he corrected gently, "and land can be acquired again. Freedom can't." She nodded slowly, a decision forming in her mind. "I have some skill with horses and cattle. My father raised both before he died. Perhaps I could work for your friend as well. To earn my passage north eventually." Jake looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Jim Holden is a good man. He'd treat you fairly, but you don't have to decide now. We have a few days before we need to leave." "I will think on it," Gabriela promised. They spent the evening preparing a simple meal together, Jake insisting that Gabriela was a guest, not a servant. The normalcy of the domestic tasks, chopping vegetables, kneading dough for tortillas, felt like balm to Gabriela's soul after her ordeal. As they ate, Jake asked about her family in Mexico, and she found herself sharing stories of her childhood in a small village outside Monterrey. In turn, he told her about his years working cattle drives and saving to buy his own place. "How did you end up in Llano?" Gabriela asked. Jake's expression grew distant. "After my parents died, I drifted, worked ranches all over Texas. Then 3 years ago, I rode through this valley, and something about it reminded me of the place where I grew up. Felt right. Took me 2 more years of saving to buy the land, and another year to build this place up." He glanced around the cabin. "Guess I didn't get to enjoy it for long." "I'm sorry," Gabriela said softly. "What you did today, I will find a way to repay you someday." Jake shook his head firmly. "That's not why I did it, and I won't hear talk of debts between us." That night, Jake insisted Gabriela take the bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fireplace. Despite her exhaustion, she lay awake for a long time, listening to his steady breathing and pondering the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Gabriela woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jake moving quietly around the cabin. She dressed quickly in the clothes he'd left for her, a simple shirt and trousers that had belonged to him, far too large but clean and whole, unlike the tattered dress she'd been wearing. When she emerged from behind the curtain, Jake looked up from the stove. "Hope you don't mind men's clothes. They're all I have, but we can try to find you something better in town before we leave." "These are fine," Gabriela assured him, rolling up the sleeves. "Thank you." After breakfast, Jake suggested they begin packing what they could. "I can't take all the furniture," he explained, "but there are some things I'd like to keep if possible." Gabriela nodded. "Tell me how I can help." They spent the morning sorting through Jake's possessions, identifying what could reasonably be transported by horseback or wagon. Jake set aside books, tools, and a few family mementos: his father's pocket watch, his mother's beaded necklace, a small portrait of his parents. As they worked, Gabriela noticed a wooden chest that Jake seemed reluctant to open. "What's in there?" she asked. Jake hesitated. "My mother's things." Her dress, some jewelry, letters my father wrote to her. You should definitely take those, Gabriela said softly. Jake nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Miss Ramirez, Gabriela, there's something I should tell you. The man who bought this place, Gerald Tucker, he's not a good man. He's been trying to buy this land for years, wanting to expand his own ranch. There's bad blood between us. Gabriela frowned. Will he cause trouble? Possibly. He might show up early, try to rush us off. I want you to be prepared. Jake looked her straight in the eyes. If anything happens, your safety comes first. I don't want you caught in the middle of an old feud. I understand, Gabriela said, touched by his concern. But I'm not helpless, Jake. I survived the bandits and the slave traders. I can handle one angry rancher. A smile tugged at the corner of Jake's mouth. I don't doubt it. Still, I'd feel better if we left sooner rather than later. They worked through the afternoon, Jake occasionally riding out to check on his cattle. By evening, they had packed most of what Jake wanted to keep, loading it onto a small wagon he'd built himself. As they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the plains, Jake turned to Gabriela. Tell me about your dreams, he said. Before all this happened. Gabriela was silent for a moment, surprised by the question. I wanted to teach, she said finally. In my village, I helped the younger children learn to read and write. My uncle in Santa Fe said there are schools there that need teachers who speak both Spanish and English. You speak English very well, Jake observed. My father insisted we learn. He said it would open doors for us. A sad smile crossed her face. He was right, though not in the way he imagined. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Jim's ranch is close to a small town. They might need a teacher. Perhaps, Gabriela agreed, not wanting to commit to any path just yet. And you? What dreams will you pursue now? Jake leaned back in his chair, considering. Honestly, I haven't thought beyond getting us safely to Fort Worth. I suppose I'll work for Jim until I can save enough to start over. We will both start over, Gabriela said with quiet determination. The next morning they were awakened by the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Jake was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle from beside the door. Stay inside, he told Gabriela, his voice tense. She nodded, but moved to the window where she could see 3 riders approaching. The man in the lead was heavyset, with a thick mustache and expensive clothes. Even from a distance, the arrogance in his bearing was evident. Jake stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. Tucker, he called, you're early. Our agreement says I have until the end of the week. Gerald Tucker reined his horse to a stop, flanked by 2 rough-looking men. Yates, heard an interesting story in town yesterday. Seems you traded this place for a Mexican whore. Thought I'd come see if it was true. Jake's posture stiffened. Watch your mouth, Tucker. I traded fair and legal for this land, and I have until Friday to vacate. Now state your business or leave. Tucker dismounted, his spurs jingling as he stepped closer. My business is making sure you understand that everything on this property belongs to me now, including whatever's in that wagon you're loading. The bill of sale was for the land and structures, not my personal possessions, Jake replied evenly. Check with the auctioneer if you don't believe me. Tucker's face darkened. I don't need to check with anyone. This is my land now, and I say what happens on it. Inside, Gabriela felt a chill run down her spine. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. She glanced around the cabin, looking for something she could use as a weapon if needed. Outside, Jake stood his ground. We'll be gone by tomorrow. Until then, this is still my home. Your home, Tucker laughed, a harsh sound. You gave it up for a piece of before he could finish. Jake had crossed the distance between them, the rifle barrel pressed against Tucker's chest. I told you to watch your mouth. The 2 men with Tucker drew their pistols but hesitated when they saw how close Jake was to their boss. You're making a mistake, Yates, Tucker hissed. "No woman is worth dying for." "That's where you're wrong," Jake replied quietly. "Now get back on your horse and come back on Friday as agreed, or I'll file a complaint with the marshal in Austin." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Tucker stepped back slowly, his face contorted with rage. "Friday," he spat. "Not a day later, and anything left behind belongs to me." He remounted his horse, jerking the reins sharply. "Boys, keep an eye on this place. Make sure our friend here doesn't damage my property before he leaves." With that, Tucker rode off, but his two men remained, settling their horses under a tree within sight of the cabin. Jake watched them for a moment before coming back inside, his face grim. "We need to leave. Now." Gabriela had already begun gathering their remaining belongings. "Those men will follow us." "Probably," Jake agreed, checking his ammunition. "But we'll have a better chance on the road than waiting here for Tucker to return with more men." They worked quickly, loading the last of their possessions onto the wagon. Jake hitched up his two draft horses, keeping Sundance separate for riding. "I'll drive the wagon," he told Gabriela. "You ride Sundance. If there's trouble, he's faster than the wagon team." Gabriela wanted to argue but recognized the practicality of the arrangement. Jake handed her a small revolver. "You know how to use this," she nodded, checking that it was loaded. "My father taught me." "Good. Stay close to the wagon, but if I tell you to ride ahead, don't hesitate." As they prepared to leave, Jake took one last look around the cabin he'd built with his own hands. His expression was unreadable, but Gabriela could sense the emotion he was holding back. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Jake shook his head. "Don't be. Houses can be rebuilt." They set out just before noon, the wagon loaded with Jake's possessions and enough supplies for the journey to Fort Worth. As expected, Tucker's men followed at a distance, making no attempt to hide their presence. "They'll probably stay with us until we're well away from Lenox County," Jake said as they traveled. "Tucker just wants to make sure we're really leaving." Gabriela nodded, her hand never straying far from the revolver tucked into her belt. The Texas landscape rolled by, beautiful despite the circumstances. They traveled until dusk, making good time on the well-established trail. That night, they made camp in a small grove of trees near a stream. Tucker's men remained visible on a distant ridge, watching. "They won't approach while I'm armed and alert," Jake assured Gabriela as they ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread. "But keep that revolver close tonight." Gabriela nodded, studying his face in the firelight. Despite the stress of the day, Jake maintained a calm demeanor that she found reassuring. "You handled danger well," she observed. Jake smiled slightly. "Had some practice. Drove cattle through Comanche territory more times than I can count." "Tell me about the cattle drives," Gabriela asked, genuinely interested and wanting to keep both their minds off their current situation. As the fire burned low, Jake shared stories of his years on the trail, the stampedes, the river crossings, the camaraderie among the cowboys. Gabriela found herself laughing at his description of a greenhorn's first encounter with a prairie dog town, momentarily forgetting the men watching from the ridge. "Your turn," Jake said eventually. "Tell me something about your life before." Gabriela thought for a moment. "When I was 16, my village held a festival for the patron saint. There was dancing, music, food. I was chosen to lead the procession because I had won a competition for reciting poetry." She smiled at the memory. "I wore my mother's best dress with flowers in my hair. It was the most beautiful night." "I can picture it," Jake said softly, and something in his tone made Gabriela look up. The way he was watching her in the firelight sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She looked away, suddenly self-conscious. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Jake nodded, banking the fire. I'll take first watch. I'll wake you in a few hours. Gabriela settled into her bedroll, but sleep eluded her. Her thoughts kept returning to the look in Jake's eyes when he'd said he could picture her leading the procession. It had been admiration, yes, but something more, something that made her both nervous and strangely hopeful. The next morning, they discovered that Tucker's men had departed during the night. Whether they'd grown bored with the surveillance or had been called back by Tucker himself was unclear, but their absence was welcome. "Don't get too comfortable," Jake warned as they broke camp. "We're still in Leno County. Tucker has friends throughout this area." They traveled steadily northward, avoiding the main roads when possible. Jake pointed out landmarks and shared knowledge of the terrain that revealed his deep connection to the land. "How far to Fort Worth?" Gabriela asked as they stopped to water the horses at a small creek. "About 5 more days at this pace," Jake replied, checking the wagon wheels. "Sooner if we push harder, but I don't want to wear out the horses." Gabriela nodded, splashing cool water on her face. The heat was intense, the sun beating down mercilessly. She had tied a kerchief over her hair for protection, but sweat still trickled down her neck. "Here," Jake said, offering her his canteen. "There's a trading post about half a day ahead. We can resupply there, maybe find you some more suitable clothes." "These are fine," Gabriela insisted, though the trousers were indeed cumbersome. "I don't want you spending more money on me." Jake's expression softened. "It's not about debt, Gabriela. It's about practicality. You need clothes that fit properly for a long journey." She relented, recognizing the sense in his words. They continued on, reaching the trading post by mid-afternoon. It was a simple establishment, a log building with attached stables situated at a crossroads frequented by travelers and local ranchers. The proprietor, a weathered man named Wilson, greeted Jake with recognition. "Yates, heard you sold your place." "That true?" Jake nodded, not elaborating. "Need some supplies, and the lady needs proper traveling clothes if you have any." Wilson eyed Gabriela curiously, but asked no questions about her presence. "Got some dresses, came in with the last supply wagon from Austin. Might have something that fits." While Jake gathered the supplies they needed, Wilson's wife helped Gabriela select a simple but sturdy dress, along with undergarments and a bonnet for sun protection. The older woman chatted amiably as Gabriela tried on the clothing behind a screen. "Traveling far, dear?" she asked. "Fort Worth," Gabriela replied cautiously. "Long journey." "You Jake's new wife?" Gabriela nearly dropped the dress in surprise. "No, we are just traveling companions." Mrs. Wilson made a non-committal sound that suggested she didn't believe this explanation. "Well, he's a good man, Jake Yates. Known him since he was driving cattle through here years back. Never seen him with a woman before, though." Gabriela emerged from behind the screen, feeling more comfortable in clothing that actually fit her. "The dress is perfect, thank you." Mrs. Wilson smiled approvingly. "Looks lovely on you, dear. I'll have my husband put it on Jake's bill." When Gabriela rejoined Jake in the main room, his eyes widened slightly at her transformation. The simple blue dress accentuated her figure in a modest but flattering way, and with her hair neatly arranged under the bonnet, she looked every inch a respectable traveler. "That's much better," he said, his voice slightly rough. "More practical for the journey." Wilson chuckled. "That all you got to say, Yates? The lady looks beautiful." Jake's cheeks colored slightly. "Yes, she does," he agreed quietly. Gabriela felt her own face warm at the compliment. "Thank you for the clothes." As Wilson tallied their purchases, the door to the trading post opened, admitting 3 cowboys. They paused when they saw Jake, recognition dawning on their faces. "Well, if it ain't Jake Yates," one of them drawled. "Heard you traded your spread for a Mexican girl. That her?" Gabriela stiffened, but Jake's hand on her arm kept her in place. "Our business isn't yours, Cooper," Jake said evenly. "We're just passing through." The cowboy named Cooper stepped closer, studying Gabriela with insolent eyes. Tucker said she was pretty, but he didn't say how pretty. "Maybe you'd consider another trade." Jake's posture changed subtly, tension radiating from him. "We're leaving now. Step aside." Cooper laughed, looking at his companions. "Hear that, boys? Yates is giving orders on Tucker's land." "This isn't Tucker's land," Wilson interjected, his hand moving beneath the counter where Gabriela suspected a shotgun was kept. "This is my establishment, and I don't want trouble. You boys take your business elsewhere today." For a moment, it seemed the cowboys might ignore the warning, but something in Wilson's tone, or perhaps the knowledge of what waited under that counter, convinced them to back down. "Another time, Yates," Cooper said, backing toward the door. "Tucker ain't finished with you yet." When they had gone, Wilson sighed heavily. "Sorry about that, Jake. Those boys work Tucker's North Range, mean as snakes, the lot of them." "Not your fault," Jake replied, his voice tight. "We appreciate your help." Wilson nodded, then lowered his voice. "Word of advice: avoid the main trail for the next stretch. Tucker's men patrol it regularly. Take the creek path instead. It's longer but safer." Jake thanked him, paid for their supplies, and they quickly loaded the wagon. As they pulled away from the trading post, Gabriela could feel her heart still racing from the confrontation. "Will they follow us?" she asked. Jake checked the road behind them before answering. "Probably. But Wilson's right, the creek path will be harder to track. We'll take that route." The path Wilson had suggested followed a winding creek through dense woods, difficult for the wagon but offering cover from pursuers. They traveled until well after dark, wanting to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Tucker's men. When they finally made camp in a small clearing, Jake insisted on no fire. They ate a cold supper of jerky and hardtack, speaking in whispers though there was no one to hear them. "I'm sorry about what happened back there," Jake said as they prepared for sleep. "Tucker's spreading the story to make trouble for us." Gabriela shook her head. "It's not your fault. Men like that, they exist everywhere." "Still," Jake insisted, "you deserve better than to be talked about that way." The genuine indignation in his voice touched Gabriela deeply. In the dim moonlight filtering through the trees, she studied his face, the strong jaw, the kind eyes now dark with anger on her behalf. "Jake," she said softly, "why did you really buy my freedom? The whole truth?" He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he sighed. "When I saw you standing there with your head high despite everything, you reminded me of my mother. She had that same dignity, that same inner strength." He paused. "But that's not all of it. Something inside me couldn't bear to see you taken by men like Tucker or Cooper. It felt like if I let that happen, I'd be betraying everything my father taught me about what makes a man worthy of the name." Gabriela reached out impulsively and took his hand. "You are a good man, Jake Yates, the best I have ever known." His fingers tightened around hers, and for a moment she thought he might pull her closer. Instead, he gently released her hand. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." Gabriela nodded, retreating to her bedroll. As she drifted toward sleep, she found herself wondering what it would have felt like if Jake had pulled her into his arms. They followed the creek path for 2 more days, moving cautiously and keeping watch for any sign of pursuit. The terrain grew increasingly difficult for the wagon, forcing them to travel slowly and make frequent stops to clear obstacles or reinforce the wheels. On the 3rd morning, disaster struck. As they were crossing a particularly rocky stretch, one of the wagon wheels hit a large stone and cracked with a sound like a gunshot. The wagon lurched sideways, nearly tipping over before Jake managed to halt the team. "Damn it," he muttered, examining the damage. The wheel had split nearly in half, rendering the wagon immobile. "Can it be repaired?" Gabriela asked, dismounting from Sundance to look. Jake ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Not here. I could maybe jury-rig something to get us to the next town, but—" He surveyed their surroundings. "We're still at least 2 days from any settlement with a proper wheelwright." Gabriela considered their options. "We could leave the wagon, take what we can carry on the horses, and abandon everything else." Jake shook his head. "Some of those things can't be replaced. My mother's chest, my father's books." "Then we find help," Gabriela said decisively. "Is there a ranch nearby? Someone who might have tools, materials?" Jake thought for a moment. "There's the Alvarez place. Should be a few hours' ride to the northeast. Old Carlos might have what we need, or at least a wagon we could borrow." "Then we go there," Gabriela said. "Together." Jake looked uncertain. "It would be faster if I went alone. You could stay with the wagon, keep watch over our things." Gabriela crossed her arms. "And if Tucker's men find me here alone?" Jake's expression darkened at the thought. "You're right. We go together, take what's most valuable with us." They spent an hour securing the wagon as best they could, hiding their most precious possessions in a hollow tree nearby, and packing essential supplies onto Sundance and one of the draft horses. The other draft horse they left tethered near the wagon with enough feed and water for a day. "If anyone comes along, they'll assume we went for help and plan to return," Jake explained as they prepared to leave. "With luck, everything will be here when we get back." The ride to the Alvarez ranch was tense. Every snapping twig, every distant bird call made them pause to listen for pursuers. But they encountered no one, and by mid-afternoon they crested a hill to see the ranch spread out before them, a modest house with several outbuildings, corrals, and fields of corn and beans. An older man looked up from mending a fence as they approached. He squinted at Jake, then recognition dawned on his weathered face. "Jake Yates, that you, boy?" Jake dismounted, extending his hand. "Mr. Alvarez, good to see you." Carlos Alvarez shook Jake's hand warmly. "Been years. Heard you bought your own spread down Llano way." "I did," Jake confirmed. "But circumstances changed." He briefly explained their situation, the auction, Tucker's hostility, and their broken wagon. The old rancher listened without interrupting, his eyes occasionally moving to Gabriela with curiosity rather than judgment. "So you need a wheel," he said when Jake had finished, "or a wagon to borrow." "Yes, sir, I'd be happy to pay or work in exchange." Carlos waved away the offer. "Neighbors help neighbors, Jake, always have." He turned to Gabriela. "Welcome to my home, señorita. My wife will be pleased to have another woman to talk to. Come inside, both of you. We'll sort this out after you've rested and eaten." The Alvarez home was warm and inviting, filled with the smells of cooking and the sounds of a large family. Carlos's wife, Elena, greeted them with the same warmth as her husband, instantly making Gabriela feel welcome. Their grown sons eyed Jake with curiosity, while their teenage daughters stared openly at Gabriela's fine features. Over a hearty meal of beans, tortillas, and roast goat, Carlos questioned Jake further about their journey and their plans. "Fort Worth is still a long way," he observed. "And if Tucker is spreading tales, you might find trouble even beyond Llano County." Jake nodded grimly. "I know. But my friend Jim Holden has a place near there. Once we reach him, we'll be safe." "Holden," Carlos mused. "Tall fellow, red beard. Drove cattle with you on the Sedalia Trail. That's him." Carlos nodded approvingly. "Good man. Helped my cousin once when his wagon broke down in a thunderstorm." He glanced at his oldest son. "Miguel, tomorrow you and Pablo will help Jake repair his wagon. Take the spare wheel from the old bugboard. It should fit well enough to get them to Fort Worth." Miguel nodded. "Yes, father," Alina turned to Gabriela. You will stay with us tonight, of course. I have clothing that might fit you better for traveling, and perhaps a bath. Women understand these things. Gabriela smiled gratefully. A bath would be wonderful. Thank you. Later, as promised, Alina provided a metal tub and hot water in a private room. The luxury of washing away the dust and grime of travel was almost overwhelming. Afterward, Alina presented her with several practical items: a sturdy riding skirt, additional undergarments, a shawl for cool evenings. These belonged to my cousin who stayed with us last year, she explained. She would want another young woman to have them. You're very kind, Gabriela said, touched by the generosity. I don't know how to thank you. Alina patted her hand. No thanks needed. I was young once, traveling in a strange land with only a man for protection. It is not easy. Gabriela hesitated. Jake and it's not what you might think. He saved me. There is no arrangement between us. Alina's eyes twinkled. I did not suggest there was, but I see how he looks at you when you are not watching and how you look at him. Some things do not need words, yes. Gabriela felt heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't deny the observation. That night, she slept in a real bed for the first time since leaving the ranch in Llano. Her dreams filled with images of Jake's face in the firelight, his eyes warm when they rested on her. The next morning, Jake and the Alvarez sons set out at dawn to retrieve the wagon. Gabriela offered to help, but Carlos insisted she remain at the ranch. The men will work faster without a beautiful woman to distract them, he said with a wink. Besides, my wife would like your help with the garden. Gabriela spent the day assisting Alina, grateful for the older woman's company and wisdom. They spoke of many things: life on the frontier, the challenges of being a woman in such harsh conditions, the importance of maintaining one's heritage while adapting to new circumstances. You are educated, Alina observed as Gabriela described her hopes of teaching. That is a rare gift for a woman in these times. You must use it. I intend to, Gabriela assured her, if I can find a position. There is a small school in a town near Fort Worth, Alina said thoughtfully. San Gabriel. My niece lives there with her husband. They have been looking for a teacher who speaks both English and Spanish for the Mexican children. Gabriela's heart quickened. Do you truly think they might hire me? Why not? You are qualified. I will write a letter of introduction. Alina studied her for a moment. Unless your plans include staying with Jake Yates, Gabriela looked away. We have made no such plans. He has already given up too much for me. Alina's expression grew serious. Let me tell you something about men like Jake. They do not count the cost when they follow their hearts. But sometimes they need help recognizing what their hearts are telling them. Before Gabriela could respond, the sound of approaching horses announced the men's return. They had successfully retrieved the wagon and replaced the broken wheel with the one from Carlos's old buckboard. Good as new, Miguel announced proudly. Better, maybe. Jake looked tired but satisfied. We loaded everything back on. We can leave tomorrow if that suits you, he added, glancing at Gabriela. She nodded, though the prospect of leaving the Alvarez family's warmth and security filled her with more reluctance than she had anticipated. That evening, Carlos and Alina insisted on hosting a small celebration for their guests. The family gathered around a bonfire in the yard, sharing food, music, and stories. One of the sons played a guitar while others sang traditional songs that reminded Gabriela painfully of home. Jake sat beside her, watching the family with evident enjoyment. When Miguel began playing a lively tune, Carlos pulled Alina to her feet for a dance. Soon the younger Alvarez children joined in, laughing and twirling around the fire. Dance with me, Jake said suddenly, extending his hand to Gabriela. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was warm and rough against hers as he led her into the circle of light. The dance was simple, a traditional Mexican pattern that Jake followed with surprising skill. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" Gabriela asked as he guided her through a turn. "My mother taught me," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "She said a man who can dance will never lack for friends." "She was wise," Gabriela said softly. They moved together around the fire, the music and the night air creating a sense of intimacy despite the presence of others. Jake's hand at her waist felt right somehow, as if it belonged there. When the music ended, they remained standing close together, neither willing to break the connection. It was Alina who finally interrupted the moment, calling everyone to enjoy the sweet bread she had baked. As they moved apart, Gabriela caught the knowing look that passed between Alina and Carlos, but couldn't find it in herself to be embarrassed. Later, as the celebration wound down and the family began to retire for the night, Jake drew Gabriela aside. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For handling everything with such grace. The auction, Tucker's men, the wagon breaking down. Most people would have fallen apart. You just keep going, finding solutions." Gabriela shook her head. "I have had practice at surviving as you have. Besides, you are the one who sacrificed everything." Jake's expression grew intent. "I'm starting to think I gained more than I lost." The words hung in the air between them, full of meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. After a moment, Jake cleared his throat. "We should get some rest." "Early start tomorrow." Gabriela nodded, though part of her wanted to extend this moment to explore the unspoken possibility in his words. "Good night, Jake." "Good night, Gabriela." Morning came too soon. After a hearty breakfast and emotional farewells, Jake and Gabriela set off in their repaired wagon. Alina pressed a sealed letter into Gabriela's hands, the promised introduction to her niece in San Gabriel, along with a basket of food for their journey. "Remember what I said," the older woman whispered as they embraced, "about helping men recognize their hearts." Carlos was more direct with Jake. "Don't be a fool, boy," Gabriela overheard him say. "Good women are rarer than gold in this country." As they rode away, Gabriela felt a curious mixture of sadness and anticipation. The Alvarez family had shown her that life on the frontier could include warmth, laughter, and community, things she had feared might be lost to her forever after her capture. "They're good people," Jake said, as if reading her thoughts. "Yes," Gabriela agreed. "I will miss them." "We could visit sometime," Jake suggested, then looked surprised at his own words, which implied a future together neither had openly discussed. Gabriela smiled. "I would like that." They traveled steadily for the next 3 days, encountering no further trouble. The land changed gradually around them, the dry plains giving way to more varied terrain with stands of trees and rolling hills. Game was plentiful, allowing Jake to hunt for fresh meat rather than relying solely on their supplies. On the 4th evening, as they made camp beside a small stream, Jake announced that they were now in Parker County. "Another day and a half should bring us to Fort Worth," he said as he built their fire. "From there, it's just a short ride to Jim's ranch." Gabriela nodded, trying to ignore the strange heaviness in her chest at the thought that their journey was nearing its end. These days on the trail with Jake had created a bond between them that seemed both natural and inevitable. Soon, they would reach civilization, and decisions would need to be made about their separate futures. "Alina gave me a letter for her niece in San Gabriel," she said finally. "She mentioned they need a teacher who speaks Spanish." Jake looked up sharply. "You're thinking of going there, perhaps. It would be a way to support myself, use my education." She hesitated. "What will you do once we reach Jim's ranch?" Jake poked at the fire, not meeting her eyes. "Work for him for a while, I suppose. Save up to buy land again someday. They ate in silence, each lost in thought. After dinner, Jake took out his father's old pipe and lit it, the sweet smell of tobacco filling the air. Gabriela watched him, memorizing the way the firelight played across his features. "My father had a saying," Jake said eventually. "A man without dreams is just taking up space. He'd be disappointed to hear me say, I'm just going to work for Jim without any real plan." "What would your dream be if you could choose anything?" Gabriela asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Land of my own again. Not as big as what I had, maybe, but enough for some cattle, horses. A place where a man and maybe his family could build something lasting." He glanced at her, then away. "What about you? Is teaching your dream?" Gabriela considered the question. "It is part of it. I want to help children learn, yes, but I also want—" She faltered, unsure how to express the deeper longing. "I want a home, people who care if I live or die, purpose." "Family," Jake said softly. "Yes." She met his eyes across the fire. "Family." Something shifted in Jake's expression, a decision being made. He set aside his pipe and moved around the fire to sit beside her. "Gabriela," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I know we've only known each other a short time and I have nothing to offer but my hands and my heart. But these days with you, they've meant more to me than all the years before." Gabriela's breath caught. "Jake." "Let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for promises. You've had too many choices taken from you already. I just want you to know that if you ever decided that your dream might include me, I'd spend every day trying to be worthy of it." Tears welled in Gabriela's eyes, not of sadness but overwhelming emotion. "From the moment you tore up that bill of sale, you have been worthy," she whispered. "You gave everything for a stranger. How could I not?" She stopped, gathering her courage. "How could I not come to care for such a man?" Jake's hand found hers, warm and steady. "Is that what you feel? Care?" Gabriela looked into his eyes, seeing hope and vulnerability there. "It began as gratitude," she admitted, "but it has become something else, something I never expected to find after everything that happened." "What has it become?" Jake pressed, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Love," Gabriela said simply. "I think I love you, Jake Yates." The word hung in the air between them, powerful and transformative. Jake's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "I know I love you," he replied. "Have since I saw you standing tall on that auction block, refusing to be broken." Then he was kissing her, his lips gentle against hers, asking rather than demanding. Gabriela responded without hesitation, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. When they finally drew apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to rush you. Whatever you decide about San Gabriel or anywhere else, I'll support it. But I needed you to know how I feel." "Thank you for telling me," Gabriela said softly, "and for giving me the freedom to choose." They sat together by the fire until late in the night, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. When they finally retired to their separate bedrolls, Gabriela fell asleep with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The next day dawned clear and bright. As they packed up camp, there was a new ease between them, touches lingering, smiles coming more readily. They made good progress, and by evening the distant lights of Fort Worth were visible on the horizon. "We'll reach town tomorrow morning," Jake said as they made their final camp. "Jim's ranch is about 10 miles beyond." Gabriela nodded, suddenly nervous about meeting Jake's friend and what the future might hold. "Will your friend mind?" she asked. "Having me come along," Jake smiled. "Jim's the most easygoing man I know, and his wife, Sarah, is always complaining about being the only woman for miles. She'll be delighted to have another woman to talk to. And San Gabriel, is it far from Jim's ranch?" Jake's smile faltered slightly. About half a day's ride. Not too far if you decide that's where you want to be. Gabriela moved closer to him. I haven't decided anything yet. Except that I love you. His arms went around her, holding her close. That's enough for now. They reached Fort Worth by mid-morning the next day. The town was bustling, far larger than Llano, with proper streets, businesses, and even a school. They passed through without stopping, Jake eager to reach his friend's ranch before dark. Jim Holden's property came into view late in the afternoon, a substantial ranch with a large house, several barns, and extensive grazing land where cattle and horses roamed. As they approached, a tall man with a red beard emerged from one of the barns, shading his eyes against the sun. Jake Yates, as I live and breathe, he called, striding toward them. Heard you might be heading this way. Jake dismounted, greeting his friend with a hearty handshake that turned into an embrace. Jim, good to see you. And who's this lovely lady? Jim asked, turning to Gabriela with a welcoming smile. Gabriela Ramirez, Jake said, helping her down from the wagon. My. He hesitated, glancing at her. Friend, Gabriela supplied, though the word felt inadequate after their declarations the night before. If Jim noticed the hesitation, he gave no sign. Welcome to the Circle H, Miss Ramirez. Sarah's going to be thrilled to have company. She's been threatening to move back to St. Louis if I don't find her some female companionship soon. As if on cue, a petite woman with golden hair appeared on the porch of the main house. Jim Holden, who are you shouting at out there? She called, then broke into a wide smile when she spotted Jake. Jake, what a wonderful surprise. Introductions were made again, and Sarah immediately took Gabriela under her wing, insisting she must be exhausted from the journey and needed rest, food, and a proper bath. Jake watched them go with an amused expression. Sarah hasn't changed, he observed. Jim chuckled. Not a bit. Still runs this place better than I do. He eyed Jake speculatively. Now, how about you tell me the real story of how you ended up here with that beautiful woman? Heard some wild tales from a trader passing through. Jake sighed. It's a long story, Jim. Got time and whiskey, Jim replied, gesturing toward the house. Come on. Inside, after getting cleaned up, Jake recounted everything: the auction, his decision to give up his ranch, Tucker's hostility, their journey north. Jim listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as the tale unfolded. Damn, Jake, he said when the story was finished. That's quite a thing you did, Jake shrugged. Couldn't have done anything else and lived with myself. Jim studied his friend's face. And now, what are your plans? Need work for starters. Thought you might have some available. Always need good hands, Jim confirmed. But that's not what I meant. What about you and Miss Ramirez? Jake took a slow sip of whiskey. She's considering a teaching position in San Gabriel. Alina Alvarez's niece lives there, might help her get settled. That's not what I asked, Jim persisted. A blind man could see you're sweet on her, and from the way she looks at you, I'd say the feeling's mutual. We've discussed it, Jake admitted. But she deserves the chance to make her own way after everything she's been through. I won't pressure her. Jim shook his head. Noble but possibly foolish. Women appreciate directness in my experience. He leaned forward. Listen, Jake, I've got a proposition for you. That north section of my property, the one with the stone cabin and good water, been thinking of selling it off. It's good land, but too far from the main house for my comfort. I'd let it go cheap to a friend. Jake stared at his friend. Jim, I can't afford land right now. That's the whole point. Didn't say anything about money up front, Jim replied. You work for me, I take the payments out of your wages. With your experience, I'd make you foreman at good pay. You could have that land paid off in 2-3 years at most. Why would you do this? Jake asked, genuinely confused. Jim leaned back in his chair. Because you're the best cattleman I know, and I need a foreman I can trust. Because that parcel needs someone to work it properly. And because I still owe you for saving my hide during that Comanche raid in '68. He smiled. Also, Sarah would never forgive me if I let Miss Ramirez get away to San Gabriel before she's had a proper chance to make a friend. Jake was speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by the generosity of the offer. I don't know what to say, Jim. Say yes, Jim advised. Then go find your lady and tell her you've got a place for that home and family you both want. In another part of the house, Gabriela was enjoying the luxury of a proper bath and female conversation. Sarah Holden proved to be warm, intelligent, and refreshingly direct. So, you're in love with Jake, she stated as she helped Gabriela wash her hair. Gabriela sputtered in surprise. Is it so obvious? Only to anyone with eyes, Sarah replied with a laugh. And he's clearly besotted with you. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know, Gabriela admitted. I have the letter for Alina's niece in San Gabriel. Teaching is a fine profession, Sarah agreed. But is it what you want most? Gabriela considered the question. I want to be useful, to have purpose. Admirable, Sarah said, rinsing soap from Gabriela's hair. But not what I asked. What do you want, Gabriela, in your heart? Jake, Gabriela whispered, the truth simple and undeniable. I want a life with Jake. Sarah smiled triumphantly. Then that's your answer. The rest are just details to be worked out. But I can't expect him to support me. He's lost everything already because of me. Sarah handed Gabriela a towel. From what I've gathered, Jake considers that the best trade he ever made. Besides, Jim is already plotting to sell him that north parcel. Been trying to convince someone to take it for years. North parcel, a lovely piece of land with a small cabin already built. Good soil, excellent water source. It would make a fine start for a family. Sarah's eyes twinkled. Just saying. As Gabriela dressed in clean clothes Sarah had provided, she felt a new sense of possibility taking shape. Perhaps she didn't have to choose between teaching and a life with Jake. Perhaps she could have both. Dinner that evening was a joyous affair. Jim and Sarah had invited their nearest neighbors, turning the meal into an impromptu welcome celebration. Jake sat beside Gabriela, occasionally touching her hand under the table, his eyes warm whenever they met hers. After dinner, while the others enjoyed music and conversation, Jake suggested they step outside for some air. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Jim offered me a job, Jake said as they walked. Foreman position, good wages. That's wonderful, Gabriela replied, genuinely pleased. There's more. Jake stopped walking, turning to face her. He's offered to sell me a piece of his land, a small parcel with a cabin already built. I'd work it off gradually from my wages. Gabriela's heart quickened. Your own land again. Our land, Jake corrected softly. If you want it to be. Gabriela looked up at him, seeing vulnerability and hope in his expression. Are you asking me to stay with you, to not go to San Gabriel? I'm asking you to marry me, Jake said, taking her hands in his. To build a life with me on that land. But, he added hastily, if you still want to teach, San Gabriel isn't far. You could ride there each day or a few days a week. We'd make it work. Tears welled in Gabriela's eyes. You would do that, support my teaching. I would support anything that makes you happy, Jake said simply. I love you, Gabriela. I want to spend my life with you, whatever form that takes. Gabriela's heart felt full to bursting. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Jake Yates. He gathered her in his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotion words couldn't express. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling through tears. We should go back inside, Gabriela said eventually. Tell the others. Jake nodded but made no move to release her. In a minute. I just want to remember this moment exactly as it is." Gabriela understood completely. After everything they had endured to reach this point, this moment of perfect happiness deserved to be savored. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony in the Holden's front yard with Jim serving as best man and Sarah as matron of honor. The local pastor officiated, and neighbors from miles around attended, curious about the couple whose story had begun so unusually. Gabriela wore a dress Sarah had helped her make, with lace from Sarah's own wedding gown adorning the collar and cuffs. Jake wore his best shirt and a new vest Jim had insisted on giving him as a wedding present. They exchanged simple vows and rings Jake had purchased with his first wages as foreman. After the ceremony, as guests celebrated with food and music, Jake led Gabriela aside. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It was my mother's. I want you to have it." Gabriela carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Inside was a miniature painting of a beautiful woman with dark hair and eyes that reminded her of Jake's. "She's lovely," Gabriela said softly. "You have her eyes." Jake nodded, helping her fasten the locket around her neck. "She would have loved you." "I wish I could have known her," Gabriela said. "And your father." "They're with us in spirit today," Jake assured her, "as are your family." Gabriela touched the locket, thinking of her parents and cousin Maria. "Yes, they are." The celebration continued until late in the evening, but eventually the newlyweds slipped away, riding to their new home on the north parcel. The cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, but Jake had spent every spare moment of the past 2 weeks preparing it, adding touches to make it comfortable. "It's not much," he said as they arrived, echoing his words from when they'd first reached his ranch in Leno. "But we can add to it over time." "It's perfect," Gabriela replied, meaning it. After all they'd been through, this simple cabin represented everything she had thought lost forever: safety, home, love. Jake lifted her from her horse and carried her across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in what would be their home. Moonlight streamed through the single window, illuminating the simple furnishings: a bed with a colorful quilt, a table with 2 chairs, a shelf with Jake's books. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," Jake said softly. Gabriela's heart swelled with love. "It sounds wonderful when you say it." His arms encircled her waist, drawing her close. "I plan to say it every day for the rest of our lives." Their kiss sealed that promise, the first of many in their new home. In the years that followed, Jake and Gabriela built the life they had dreamed of that night by the campfire. The small cabin grew as their family did, first with the addition of a proper kitchen, then a second bedroom when their son James was born 2 years after their wedding. A third room followed when their daughter Alina arrived 3 years later. Jake's work as foreman for the Circle H prospered, and within 5 years, he had paid off the land and begun acquiring additional acreage. Their own brand, the Lazy Y, became known for quality horses and cattle throughout the region. True to his word, Jake supported Gabriela's desire to teach. 3 days a week, she rode to San Gabriel, where she taught the children of Mexican workers and settlers, helping them preserve their heritage while adapting to their new country. When James and Alina were old enough, they accompanied her, proud of their mother's work. On the days she wasn't teaching, Gabriela worked alongside Jake on their ranch, her knowledge of horses proving particularly valuable. Together they weathered the challenges of frontier life: drought, harsh winters, occasional trouble with rustlers. News eventually reached them that Gerald Tucker had lost most of his land in a gambling debt, a development that brought neither of them any particular pleasure or regret. The past was behind them, important only for the path it had set them on. They maintained their friendship with the Holdens, the two families celebrating holidays and special occasions together. When Jim and Sarah's daughter married James Yates, 20 years after Jake and Gabriela's wedding, the bond between the families became official. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were grown and pursuing their own dreams, Jake and Gabriela would sit on the porch of their much-expanded home and marvel at the journey that had brought them there. "You ever regret it?" Gabriela asked once, her head resting on Jake's shoulder as they watched the sunset. "Giving up your first ranch for me?" Jake's arm tightened around her. "Not for a single moment. Everything I truly valued, I kept my parents' mementos, my books, and I gained something far more precious." "What was that?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Jake smiled, kissing her temple gently. "A love worth more than land or gold, a family, a home in the truest sense." He chuckled softly. "Best trade I ever made." Gabriela smiled, thinking of the frightened young woman who had stood on an auction block at dawn, tears in her eyes, convinced her life was over. How wrong she had been. That day hadn't been an ending but a beginning, the first chapter in a love story that had proven stronger than fear, prejudice, or hardship. "The best trade," she agreed, leaning up to kiss the man who had bid everything he owned to set her free, and in doing so had found his own freedom in her love.